Well, welcome back everyone to the webinar series, Embracing Change. We have an absolute treat, Nat, who's now in Waiheke Island in New Zealand. I had the honor and privilege of spending 2 beautiful meals together with her and her husband, Michael, just before my silent retreat and after. And she poked me, prodded me, and is doing her best to keep me in check, which we all know is a tall order. So thank you, Nat, for being here with us today, taking the time and the space to go into a very light topic, shame, and if we have time, superego. So Nat, maybe you want to give a couple of minutes of background so everybody has an idea of who you are, and then let's have some fun.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It was wonderful to meet you, Faisal, here on Waiheke Island. And so I work as a psychotherapist internationally, and with families and with individuals and couples. So yeah, that's my background over the last 30 years.
So shame, what is shame? What does that even mean?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was really reflecting on what would be a useful topic to talk about. And in my experience in the last 30 years, I feel like shame is one of the topics that's often quite misunderstood. And it's really part of all our experience. And it's really probably the main thing that really inhibits us being all of who we can be as individuals, and also really interferes in relationships, also with couples and with parenting and in the school system. And so, what shame is, often we think of shame as an emotion but really what it is a strategy. And a lot of people don't realize that when we're children, the primary thing that you need with your family, with your parents, is to attach. And really, attachment is a form of love, how to connect with your parent. Because for a child, your parents are the whole world, they're the whole universe. And often parents will be, very stressed or preoccupied, or you might even have a mother who had postnatal depression, had to go to hospital. And the way a child will deal with that, because attachment is so primary, it's very hard for them to connect to their authenticity and be connected to a parent who's not present. So the child will go, well, there must be something wrong with me. Because in a way, so that's the shame as a strategy. It's an identification with, because my parent can't be wrong, my parent is good, then if I make myself bad, then that means that I can work hard to get better, so I'll get the love of my parent. So, and often then what happens, it's a survival strategy when we're little, and it really works for a while, it helps us survive. But then later as adults, we still carry these shame-based identifications around with us, and it really interferes with life. It interferes with our connection to our emotions, our connection to ourselves, and really following our life force and who it is that we really want to be, and that flow of love. So yeah, so that's how I see shame.
So yeah, most people wouldn't call it a strategy, but I guess it's a survival strategy, more like it, right?
That's right.
Or okay, so it's a way to make sense of the world through our lens as a child or as a young person who's so most of it is happening from the 0 to 8 identity time, or even later?
Yeah, so I would say kind of the core of it. So our sense of self is actually created in the first few years. So we're actually not born, we're born, this kind of, we call it an undifferentiated conscious, feeling one with everything. And then slowly we construct a sense of self. And that sense of self is what some people in some traditions call the ego. And that's how we need a healthy ego to operate in the world. And so if we have a safe holding environment where parents are attuned, and this is where all the science around attachment comes in, attachment being parents who are attuned, who mirror you back to yourself, who delight in you for who you are, all that starts to create a healthy sense of self. Now, there are going to be, in all families, there are misattunements or in some families, there are real traumas that happen with the child. So that will interfere in that healthy sense of self. And within that will become these will come in these shame-based identifications. Yeah, to preserve the attachment with my parent, I have to disconnect from myself. I have to tell myself that I must be bad, because a child can't feel good in a bad environment. If a child's in a bad environment, or an environment that doesn't feel good, that feels bad, then they will internalize it as I am bad. So that can also happen, say, parents are going through divorce, or, there are all kinds of everyday events that create what we call little T's, so little traumas. It's kind of a whole spectrum of trauma. I think trauma is becoming now quite a mainstream word, because there's a lot more awareness coming in around trauma. And how, when we look at, like, most people in the prison system, for example, would have a lot of trauma, which is why they're acting out, and a lot of shame-based identifications. So it's a spectrum, and we're all somewhere on that spectrum in terms of having absorbed and constructed these shame-based identifications.
I mean,
that
some
then
people
inhibit
are,
our life, that then inhibit the way we are in life.
yeah, and some people are kind of getting tired of using trauma as the reason, as the cause, as the excuse, quote unquote, right? So it's becoming, I think, because it's being used so much, people are starting to get tired, right? Where, you have no idea what I've been through, you have no idea what my life's been like, and they use that as a reason to be the way they are, without reframing or reworking the experience as a child, or whatever happened. So it's kind of now balancing, because trauma is being used all the time, right? And it's getting a bit tiring, you can say, for some.
Well, yeah, that's right, Faisal. And I think, well, it's an explanation, but not an excuse. But I think as the information gets out there, I think more and more adults will then take the responsibility to do their work. Because the truth is, when you're a child, you are a victim of circumstances. A child can't fight their parents, they can't fight their environment, and they can't flee. They're really, a child will do, they're stuck in the environment. So they have to create these survival strategies to be able to maintain themselves in the environment. So children truly are victims of, say, child sexual abuse, or, a mother not being present, or parent dying. But as you said, as an adult, if we can more and more in our culture understand there's a responsibility of every adult to do their work, I think we'd be in a very different society. And as you know, this trauma then gets transmitted generationally. So from great grandparents to grandparents to parents to children. And so as we do our work, we then allow that flow of love through the generations to flow more fluidly, and release the shame and the strategies that we use to act out. So acting out would be aggression, anger, violence, or the acting in. And there's a lot more acting in than we realize. Acting in would be like shaming oneself, putting oneself down, withdrawing, that kind of behavior.
So yeah, maybe if you're comfortable, we can, we had a beautiful session, you and I, on Sunday. And as I explained, for a number of years, my beloved kept saying that there's a deep anger within. And for whatever reason, none of the team was able to figure out what was really going on, even though they were kind of probing and poking. And in my last quarantine, that was for a week, the process began. And it went back to me as a child, not having the physical abilities to be able to swim, to be able to run, to be able to do the physical, the pull-ups, and having that inadequacy of physicalness as a young boy, to play the sports and do all the things that everybody else did, pass the standard test of physical athletics. also was not possible because of the strength and the created by asthma and all the other stuff that was happening physically. So, we spoke about that, and maybe we can share a little bit of the process and what, obviously it's about me, but you were the one who helped me through it on Sunday.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you just said the word inadequacy, because this is what I would call a shame-based strategy. So when you looked at that inadequacy, what was it then that you told yourself? So there was the fact that you had asthma, and so you were weaker. And it sounds like you internalized that in some way we were looking at. So yes, as you feel into it, what was it that you told yourself about yourself?
Oh, obviously that you're not good enough, you're not capable, you're not, but then you created a defense or an attack, a counterattack, right, to that piece, and started to learn to beat them at their game, even in the physical and beyond.
Yeah, that's right. So that's such a beautiful example, Faisal, of how there was a shame-based identification. You took it personally. There's something wrong with me, that I'm weaker or have asthma. And then it was covered up by a pride-based identification. I'm going to push, I'm going to beat them. And what we're looking at is perhaps there was a way, it sounds like that was a brilliant strategy at that age, but then that might get limiting, as we were looking at with you as an adult, because you have to sacrifice a lot to beat them, to be the best, to be number one. What gets sacrificed is your own emotions and your own authenticity. And that's kind of what we were looking at with you, how that's showing up now, where there's kind of a drivenness or a pushing, which is a pride-based identification, which then covers up that shame-based identification.
It's
so
interesting that
having to be driven is part of that pride-based, I think you said it really well, that the counter move. Yeah.
It's interesting that I think that in the work side and the society's definition of success side piece, I think it got knocked out through the first experience of cancer. I think that was kind of put, but when it came to, but there's still this lingering piece, which is affecting the personal relationships, right? I keep being told, come back to your heart, come back to your heart. And when I'm speaking or I'm writing or I'm at work or I'm with families, that never comes up, because they can feel me. They know that I truly care. I truly love. I'm doing this because it matters, and I'm there to be of service. But it's interesting there, I'm able to have the authenticity, the openness. But when it comes to personal relationships, of the core, in my case, very few, my sons and my beloved, there they start to feel it, which everybody else doesn't. So that's quite interesting, right? So why is that? Why are they able to feel what nobody else is able to feel?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it, that we can show up really differently in different areas of our life. And it sounds like at work that structure in you is not triggered at work, because the relationships are quite safe at work. We're just in, time is limited, and we're not threatened by too much intimacy, and we can leave at any time. So you're going to find most of these structures and patterns show up in our intimate relationships, because really our intimate relationships trigger, the little boy, the little Faisal, and the little girl in your partner. So, and what we'll find is when our, often our hearts are our hearts are really broken when we're very little, when our parents are not available, when we're not connected to our parents. And so it becomes, later on, we'll have all these strategies, because it will feel dangerous to really open our hearts. There'll be some unconscious thought, oh, if I really open my heart, I could be hurt again. Or if I really open up my heart, and I really, really, and my partner really sees me, she won't like what she sees. So these are a lot of the kind of shame-based identifications that can get triggered. So then what we do is we go into our patterns and, avoid the relationship. This happens on such an unconscious level. We're not even aware we're doing it. So for me, for example, how that might show up with my husband is overworking. Or, when I'm about to, I've said to him, oh, we'll have dinner at a certain time, I find myself doing an extra piece of work or taking on another client. So, I'm onto myself now. My husband's onto me, but that's what I would call a bit of that avoidant attachment in terms of, it feels safer on some level to be out of relationship at times than the intimacy of relationship. So I think we're all somewhere on that spectrum. And perhaps that's another subject that we could cover another time, is attachment and the spectrum of anxious attachment to avoidant attachment. Again, which all ties into shame, which is, kind of modeled on, again, our early relationships with our caregivers in terms of how much intimacy we can tolerate. Yeah. So how does any of that resonate for you, Faisal?
No, I think, I remember there was a podcast that she had watched on attachment theory, and I listened to the podcast, and I did the online assessment, and 50% was fine, 25% was mediocre, but 25% was questionable. And the questionable one showed that something had happened from 0 to 18 months, which you can imagine I couldn't remember. But lucky for me, I have, an incredible team like yourself that is there to care for me. And in one session with one of my experts, was able to go back and zone into an incident that happened at 8 months, which was quite interesting because it was with my father's mom, and she was only there till I was 1. So it was interesting to see. So that also, was something that we looked at, because, we're trying to find what's going on. Why is Faisal, getting triggered, right? Getting triggered while he's able to stay calm in all other situations, right? And I've been through, we've operated in some very interesting countries and had to deal with heads of state who weren't exactly the most easy to deal with, let's put it lightly, right? And also dealing with, situations on taking care of families that are very, very challenging, right? We're dealing whole spectrum of things that are going on. But I guess, like you said, this is intimacy, right? The fear. I remember asking even one of my coaches saying, have I truly loved? Is this the first time that I'm really putting my heart on the table? And that's why the trigger is happening, right? And that was a question that I asked for quite a few years, right? Recently, to say, wait a minute, what's going on, right? Did I not take the risk before? And am I taking the risk now? Or obviously that, this is someone who's actually, I don't know, maybe cares, or there's the intimacy is at a different level where the poking and the prodding and the triggering is happening. I don't know. What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, my take is that it sounds like you're really inquiring into this. So my take is that there's a part of you, the adult in you, really is wanting more intimacy and a close connection. But what's getting triggered is these unconscious, attachment triggers that are coming up, which are really survival strategies that get in the way of what it is that you really want. So if I was working with you, Faisal, we just keep looking at what is it that you really want, and keep looking at how you unconsciously get in the way of yourself, and really learning how to honor those strategies. So we never judge them. We really honor them. They were necessary for us when we were little, but then they become very limiting. So, and I think it's really helpful to read about attachment and understand attachment, because it operates at such a deep unconscious level. We're not even aware of it. For example, I get quite a lot of clients who have, I might just, should I briefly talk through the attachment theory?
Yeah, yes, please. Yeah, I mean,
I think
it's all
really
interconnected.
helpful.
Yeah, it's all interconnected.
It's really helpful. So the thing is, again, when you have a safe, early holding environment that's healthy, and parents are attuned and delighted in their children and who you are, and there's, minimal stress in the environment, minimal arguing between parents, children will create a secure attachment. So that means that their nervous systems, they're regulated on their own. They feel in harmony and connected to themselves and regulated by themselves, and they can also co-regulate with their parents. So say they're upset, they can come to their parent will soothe them, and they trust that their parent will soothe them and see them and validate them. So that's secure attachment. And then we carry these attachment styles into adulthood. So if you have a securely attached attachment model within, you will tend to have fairly free-flowing, healthy relationships as an adult, where intimacy is easy with the other, and you can also feel intimate with yourself when you're alone. So you don't get triggered around abandonment, but also you don't get triggered by engulfment when you're with someone. So say you had a parent, sounds like made you laugh, the word engulfment. So there's a little clue to your attachment style. So that's kind of a little clue to perhaps an avoidant attachment style. As I think you kind of said, oh yeah, 50% of me is secure. Yes. Sounds like there might be 25% avoidant.
Yes,
and then there might be another 25.
Yes, that was actually the result.
Yeah.
And that 25 was the alarming one, which I then took action on, because I was like, this is not good.
Yeah. And when we say alarming, we kind of really understand it's what you had to do as a child to survive the environment. So I'll talk a bit about avoidant attachment. So when you have an early environment and you really want your mother, I'll just use the mother as an example. Yeah. You really want your mother and you really want to connect with your mother, but your mother's preoccupied, or it might be that she has a younger baby, or she might be pregnant and feeling very sick in her pregnancy, hospitalized. So there's a feeling for the child, it's too painful to want connection when connection is not available, because I'm always left wanting. And so to protect itself, the child will disconnect from mother, disconnect from the attachment to regulate themselves. So they become very good at regulating themselves, but it's more difficult to regulate with another. So how that shows up in adult life is I'll have a lot of clients who come in and go, oh, I can't find the right woman. So they'll find a woman, they're madly in love for the first few months, and then suddenly know, oh no, this woman isn't right for me. She's this, she's that. And they're convinced that they're seeing the truth, or she's not pretty enough, or she's not intellectual enough. And then you watch the same cycle happen again. So what's happening is after a few months, when the connection becomes more intimate, they unconsciously, it becomes threatening, because connection is threatening if you are predominantly avoidantly attached, because unconsciously you would tell yourself it's dangerous to be close to someone who could disappoint you, just like I was disappointed very early on. And again, all this isn't conscious, it's very unconscious. So this is why it's so important to do our work, because there's a lot of suffering through carrying on with these patterns through adulthood. And that's why I would be, if we were working together, more deeply on this, it would be to ask you, what is it that you're really wanting in a relationship?
Well, we all want, I personally want the intimacy, but then again, right, the whack of also being divorced, I guess, brings in the abandonment, the trigger, right?
Yeah.
Just, those pieces are real, right? Whether it's even from one room to the other, or just leave the apartment, or all these pieces start to bring back that piece that you spoke about of abandonment, right? So
and as you were talking about before, the first layer of that might have happened when you were 8 months old, I know it did for me. I know as I've done my deeper work, my mum left me for when I was 8 months for 6 weeks. So we lived in England. She left me in France to my grandmother, who I hadn't known till then. And it was really interesting doing some deeper work, because you actually can access those memories as you do the deeper work. It's all wired in your nervous system. I mean, attachment is wired in your nervous system. That's why it's such an unconscious response. And unraveling that has been key for me to become personally more securely attached. So these, and often we're not even aware of these events that happen very early on. But they really do impact us. And then we have anxious attachments. There's kind of avoidant attachment, secure attachment. Anxious attachment is when our parent was there, so we did get some care, but they were very preoccupied, so it was inconsistent. So you're kind of left always wanting to connect, or looking out for your partner, or fearing they're going to abandon you, or staying fixated on them, but it's harder to regulate yourself on your own. So people who
when
are
you're
more
on,
anxious,
not when you're with them.
yeah.
When you're
So you're
on
not
your
very good at regulating yourself on your own, or being on your own. You can get very anxious being on your own.
Okay.
And there's always kind of, these people can show up as being quite needy or needing a lot of reassurance. So that's more anxiously attached. And often couples will find that someone who's more avoidantly attached will be attracted to someone who's more anxiously attached. You know, it's just the way. So they both have insecure attachment. Or what can happen is that if someone's very anxiously attached, the other partner will become more avoidantly attached. Or if someone's very avoidantly attached, that will activate anxious attachment in another. So we kind of all, in couples, we're kind of all in some kind of dance, you know, either the pursuer distancer dance, where the anxious attached one becomes the pursuer and the avoidant attached one becomes the distancer. So these are kind of all rackets that we unconsciously get into. You know, most of the time in relationships, you know, we're just 2-3-year-olds doing our little dance. Yeah. So hence the importance of doing that deeper work, which is really wired into the brain and the nervous system. But the really good news is that we're neuroplastic, and we can really, by doing this deeper attachment work, trauma work, people call it by different names, you know, working in a neurobiological way, you can really shift this patterning and this nervous system patterning, so that you can stay more regulated and connected, and improve your capacity to stay connected to yourself and to the other, and open up more and more your capacity for intimacy.
Wow.
Yeah, intimacy, which is really into me see. Yeah, I can really allow you to see into me. And here we're kind of coming back to our topic of shame. If I have a lot of unconscious shame-based identifications, there'll be a real fear of intimacy. If you into me see, what will you find? You'll find that you'll find me out. You know, a lot of people feel, I get so many clients say, you know, secretly, I'm a fraud. I'm a top doctor, top pediatrician, but I feel like I'm a fraud. What if people find out about me? So that's what we call an unconscious shame-based identification.
Wow.
But on some level, they really believe it.
Wow.
Yes,
Tough.
it's tough. And you were kind of talking about it then, just subtly, in terms of, you know, perhaps there's a fear of really being seen. What will happen? So that's the kind of unconscious things that are driving us that we're not aware of, and that drives a lot of our behaviors.
So seeing the weakness, I mean, what would it, with the weakness, the fallibility, what would be, like, from the words I've used, what would you think being seen?
Well, what I would do if I was working with you, I'd ask you, what is it that comes up if you really imagine your partner really seeing you? Yeah, what do you notice come up?
You know, simple, basic, no frills, just ordinary.
Yeah, so Faisal, sounds like with the work you've done, there's kind of you're becoming healthier in terms of just being able to be with yourself as you are.
And there's obviously a lot going on, but at the end, it's just just basic human needs, right? Wants and desires that are nothing more,
and just,
nothing less.
Yeah. That's it, just relaxing into phasalness, the human beingness. Yeah, just as you are, and knowing that you're lovable fundamentally just as you are. You know, a lot of us, we don't realize, but unconsciously, we don't feel we're lovable just as we are. We feel we have to perfect ourselves, improve ourselves, become better versions of ourselves. And a lot of the self-improvement industry is fueled by shame. I'm not enough. I need to be enough. I need to be more to be loved. I need to achieve to be loved. So as you do your inner work and all that drops away, you become a lot more relaxed. Yeah. And then you can act from your authenticity rather from strategies. Yeah. How does that sound? It's a lot more relaxing way to live.
Yep. Sounds very natural, actually. Yeah. That's always been the case of, the human doing versus the human being. And that was, when I wrote the first book and talked about it, it's the same side of the coin, because from being comes doing, and just being many a times in terms of, is valid. And then what? Right? So I think that balance, and that's how this process began. I don't remember now, 8 weeks ago or so, where it was, how can you show up as a default as the human being, not wearing the hat of doing, and then when needed or requested, put on the human doing hat, and just, so completely, I guess, the opposite. And maybe coming in from work every day, or coming in from the sports in the morning, that activity kept that hat on, right? And therefore the comment of come back to your heart, which was actually talking about come back to your authenticity, right? Just be the simple, basic, core human without all the stuff.
Yeah, because this is what we disconnect from at such an early age. A lot of us disconnect from our hearts because actually we're very heartbroken, and there's a disconnect that happens to protect ourselves. So in this work, that's what we're doing, is healing that heartbreak to recover our own hearts. What's so sad is that we disconnect from ourselves, again, to attach to our caregivers. And it's such a beautiful journey to reconnect with who we are. And then we become much better parents when we reconnect with who we are. Everything opens up. Our relationships, at work, at home, our sense of fulfillment, because to have your heart is to be full of yourself. There's kind of it's interesting you use the word full of yourself in an ego sense, but the truth is, when you're in being, you do become full of who you really are, of yourself as you are. And
really something that's interesting. I've done 90 webinars, and I haven't moved this much in my chair in any of them.
So that's interesting.
I've readjusted myself 4 times. And I've never adjusted myself even once in any of the other webinars. So obviously the body is finding this a little more challenging than it may seem.
Yeah. So tell me a bit more what's happening in your body. And it's great you're noticing it.
No, I mean, it's I'm trying to keep my emotions calm, to be honest.
Yeah. So what would happen if you didn't Keep your emotions calm. What about?
I would start crying.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're just kind of creating the space for the tears to come. Yeah, because tears are beautiful. Yeah, and tears are a way of connecting back with who you really are. Yeah. How is that to give yourself the space to just let the tears come?
Yeah, it's freeing.
Yeah. Freeing. Yeah. Can you tell me more about that sense of freedom?
No, they don't have to do anything. Just there's no agenda.
Mm.
There's no destination. There's don't have to be anyone or go anywhere.
Yeah. That's right. And it's very touching on the other side to notice your tears. I can really feel in between us now this real heartfulness and tenderness.
You just wonder why it can't be simple.
Yeah.
Why does it have to be so challenging to be in intimacy? It's sometimes you just cry and wonder.
Yeah. Well, sounds like, yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
And I was just saying that it sounds like through the work you're doing, you're really discovering the simplicity of your own heart and your own being.
Yeah, you wonder why life needs to be so complicated.
Mm. Well, it's complicated, isn't it? Using all those strategies. That really, there's, childhood strategies to stay safe, to protect one's sense of self. That's what these strategies are about.
Yeah, but you feel like pressing Control Alt Delete. But you can't.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
you can, but it takes a little more than Control Alt Delete in the old days.
Yeah.
To reboot the system.
Yeah. So that was beautiful because you really modeled then, it was like a little, a few seconds modeled of what it is to really do the work, which means a lot of it is just sitting with the emotions that weren't completed. We couldn't complete them as children because children, there are two primary emotions, anger and grief, that are too overwhelming for children. So they'll tend to compartmentalize them or repress them. And just imagine, what do you notice? I just asked you the question, what do you notice when you feel angry? How do you experience anger?
Heart rate goes up. Can't think clearly. I don't really get angry much, but
Yeah,
I guess heart rate goes up. Can't think straight.
Yeah.
You're reactive.
Yeah. So imagine how much energy it takes to suppress anger. Do you get a sense of that now?
Yeah.
So you can see that it takes a lot of energy to suppress anger. And so children, it's too threatening for a child often to feel angry, but particularly anger at parents. Say you have an alcoholic father who's very angry. As a child, you quickly learn, I can't be angry at my father for being angry because, that's too dangerous. So then imagine all the energy that gets into suppressing that anger. Often a child will feel when a parent's being very abusive with them, for example, a child will feel hate But hate is very threatening for a child to feel. So a child will turn it in on themselves and hate themselves. So we're talking about, the amount of energy it takes to suppress emotions when we're little, because there are emotions that we just can't feel and complete when we're little. And as we do our work when we're adults, we can then we can have emotional completion. So we were just doing modeling a little bit of this with your sadness. Sounds like there are a lot of tears deep in your heart that you weren't able to cry. And what I would say is that it would have felt for you wasn't a good strategy, because then it would have been overwhelming, the sadness and the tears. And then probably you would have been afraid of going into a depression or a collapse. So you had a very good pride-based strategy, which is to prove and to fight and to be the best. So then as adults, what we can do is we can renegotiate these emotions and complete them. And there's something very settling in feeling our unwept tears and feeling the sadness we couldn't feel. We start to reconnect and feel our own hearts. As you so beautifully put, the simplicity of our own being. And it's a very powerful experience to feel the innocence of your own heart.
I kept being reminded that there's nothing more that needs to be done. There's nothing, don't have to do anything, don't have to prove anything, just be.
Yeah, yeah. But as you can see, those strategies, they're wired in the nervous system to be the best, it takes a while, doesn't it, to unwind it. And, but the beautiful thing is that there's a lot of capacity that's built through having had that survival strategy. There's a certain excellence that's wired into you now. There's a certain, high level of efficiency, which you'll always have access to, but you don't have to sacrifice yourself to achieve. You don't have to put all your emotional energy into achieving. You can stay connected to your full emotions whilst achieving at a high level, with a lot more relaxation.
You read about power versus force, but I think we just keep learning the meaning of power, right? As you relax into, you're saying, state of being or your origin, going back home, right? Coming back home.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's really counterintuitive that power is already here as we relax into ourselves and disidentify from our shame-based identifications and our pride-based identifications. We start to feel the power that we are. It's almost like our pride-based identification is, I think I'm God. But when you relax into yourself, you go, I am God. And I'm using the word God. It could be universal, life force. It can be, we all have different words. The evolutionary impulse, we have different words for it, but there's a relaxation and actually a deep humbling. I am that. This is who I am. And so all those strategies drop away and I can just simply be myself. I think you said it so beautifully before, is kind of being in touch with ordinariness. And in that ordinariness, there's a uniqueness, like there's never been anyone like Faisal ever before in the history of the universe. There's never been anyone with your particular genetics, your particular makeup, the experiences you've had and how that shaped you, the environment you've been born in, the time, the essential essence of Faisal. And what happens is that we start to relax into our uniqueness. And so even the whole feeling of competition just starts to fall away and drop away. And we can really value another person's uniqueness. And we all become part of a tapestry, in terms of community, where everyone, we can really value each other's essential nature and qualities and the way life shows up through them. So it's a very different, isn't it? This trying to be special, to prove oneself, to relaxing into who we are, which is much more magnificent than we could ever possibly imagine. And at the same time, so ordinary.
That's the thing, right? It's like reconnected with the God within, as you put it, but you know, it's said in a way that's kind of, you know, with all the words of consciousness and mindfulness, but actually it's all that is it's just simple, right? Going back to your core, going back to the essence.
Yeah.
Right. You came, as you said, with you know, complete clean slate, right, when you were born. That knowing. And now you're going back to that knowing with all the noise.
Yeah. While you're coming back to that knowing with consciousness, what you find is you do your internal work and release all these introjections or shame-based identifications and pride-based identifications. It releases also a lot of the inner conflict we have, because a lot of us are in inner conflict without even realizing, and your mind does become quieter and quieter and more spacious. That's through doing that inner work and completing the emotions that weren't completed and really reconnecting with ourselves in a deeper way. I would say it's more effective than meditation. A lot of people, when they sit down to meditation, have very busy minds. But as you do the inner work, it just frees, because you're not fighting yourself. You're not trying to be something. You're not trying to prove yourself. You're not trying to manipulate your environment. You're not trying to be what other people want you to be. You're not seeking validation. You know, you're being, and what you'll find is that life works a lot better. I'm sure you've noticed that, have you, as you've been doing the work?
I'm a work in progress.
Yeah,
like all of us. But supposedly from the external perspective, I'm a serious work in progress. Since I have an army of experts who are doing their best to keep me in check, quote unquote, and help me heal, which is quite
And another topic I wanted to bring in is we were going to talk about superego. I'm not sure how much time do we have? Do you have a bit of time?
Yeah, we have another 15 minutes. Let's
another 15 minutes. Great. So I might talk a bit about narcissism and the superego.
Okay.
So, because often, you know, a bit like shame, narcissism is really misunderstood as well. That narcissism is really also part of this shame-based identification is I'm bad, I'm not worthy of love, I'm not enough just as I am. That's what we internalize. Then on top of that, the pride-based identification, I'm going to prove them I'm the best. That's all covering up shame-based identification. Yeah. And the pride-based identification is a form of narcissism, which is an adaptation. Yeah. So you're adapting to your environment. Narcissism, I'm going to create a persona. I'm going to be something, or I'm going to get the love of my parents, to get the validation. So
I was very good at that. Very good at that. Yeah. I crushed it. I crushed it. Yeah. Ended up with cancer, but crushed it.
Yeah.
So keep going.
Yeah. So we're looking at narcissism. There's a whole spectrum. Yeah. From personality disorder, you know, when it really does deeply impact your relationships, your working life, to, you know, there's kind of that more overt narcissism to covert narcissism. There's a whole spectrum, and we all, as long as we're identified with this is who I am, there's some form of, you know, narcissism. And I think it's not well talked about in society. It kind of has a bad rap, narcissism. But
nobody's
really
ever called me a narcissist, but today's a new day.
We all have narcissistic traits. Most of us.
Don't try to make me feel better, Nat. It's okay. It's okay.
Well, I know I do. Yeah. Even going, oh, I'm not enough, is a form of narcissism.
I didn't know that. That's the first time I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah, it's what we call covert narcissism. So it's kind of a collapse in that I'm just self-referencing. I'm not enough. No one loves me. No one likes me. It becomes all about me, and I'm not present to my children.
Yeah.
So that's a form of narcissism. So again, we're looking at narcissism as an adaptation, which is all built in with these shame-based identifications. So the freer we are of these identifications and the feelings of lack and not enoughness, and then the compensation with the persona and pride-based identifications, the more present we are, which is, where we're just kind of, being who we are and present with the other. And I was going to talk about the superego as well. So the superego, it's really another way of talking about, it's a psychoanalytic term. Freud first used the word superego, and it's just talking about the part of our ego, it's that internal voice we have. And even if we're not aware of it, we all have an internal voice. There's a way that we talk to ourselves, say, oh, come on, come on, Nat, do better, or I don't really have much of it anymore. I've done 30 years of inner work, so it is pretty quiet these days, but surely it can be triggered sometimes. It will come as, just a feeling of, pushing oneself, or just saying, oh, I'm not enough, or say my husband doesn't want to be with me anymore. It's like, oh, he doesn't want to be with me because, oh, I'm so terrible, or I'm this, or I've done that, or I'm not. It could be I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm just not enough. That's how the superego is kind of an inner bully and an inner judge and an inner critic. And so it's operating in the background, most of the time until we really, transition in a different stage of development, or we do a lot of our inner work. And it creates enormous amounts of suffering. I would say really a lot of the, really deep suffering in the world, particularly in the West, comes from these shame-based identifications and the stories we tell ourselves and how we judge and criticize ourselves. For a lot of us, it's pretty constant. Driving ourselves to be better. Even the whole self-improvement thing is, I'm not enough, so I have to improve myself. Or I won't give that talk until I've done enough courses. So it might be kind of like me. This is my history, being a course junkie, doing this personal development and that personal development, this therapy, then I'll know, then I'll be better, then I'll have more expertise. So that can be this kind of, it's all part of that drivenness, is this way that we push ourselves internally to be better, because underneath we don't feel like we're enough. And that can be acted in, that inner judge, inner critic. It can also be acted out, projected onto others, in terms of become very judgmental about others, very judgmental about our kids, very critical. So I'm wondering whether you relate to any
100%. I was asked to stop training. I was spending a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy on training. And I was asked by, Dr. Sadeghi, our integrative doc, to stop training and stop reading. I was reading 1 or 2 books a week. I mean, there's a chapter in my previous book that talks about, am I good enough? And that's so, but I think that, over time with the space, right, with the work done, it's a lot less on the work side, but I think on the intimacy side, I think that superego is still there, kind of questioning, or whatever the word is, the inability, I would say, or to be intimate, right, and be triggered. But I guess there's the other piece as well. So I guess they're all having fun, Nat.
Yeah, so you're saying that the superego tells you, I mean, really, it's you're telling yourself that you're not capable of intimacy.
Not that I'm not capable, but maybe it's saying not.
Or it might just be in that moment. I'm not saying you believe that generally, but in that moment. So this is a really good example of how it operates.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's just a story.
Yeah, in the moment of being triggered and in that challenging time, for sure it's saying that. There's no debate, right?
Yeah. And as we slow that down, it sounds like that gets in the way of actually you having what you really want, which is more intimacy. You tell yourself a story. I'm not capable of intimacy. What are you attempting to do by telling yourself that story in that moment?
When you tell that story, you sabotage the whole possibility of being in intimacy.
Yeah.
So you're protecting yourself from actually being intimate.
Yeah.
Out of fear of whether it's abandonment or loss or pain or hurt or whatever the words that coined that space.
And what do you notice as you say that?
I think, I mean, I'm obviously calm now, so it's easier to talk about, right? I mean, I'm just shocked at, I don't get up from a table. I've sat on tables with people you wouldn't want to ever sit with, and I've never walked away from a table. And I did, which for me was shocking. Right? Because I can handle a lot of, brutal conversations. So let's put it that way. But these were not brutal. They were just, gentle requests, right? Asking things that I guess put me out of my league or triggered me beyond my understanding. And I actually got up, which for me is very, very surprising.
Yeah.
And I did it more than once.
Okay. So as you track that, what was it that was going on internally?
When I think back in that moment?
Yeah. What was she asking of you, and what happened internally before you left the table?
I think to go towards what you shared, the ordinary. To let go of all structure, all positioning, all of everything. Just let go and just be here without everything else.
Yeah, so as we sit with that, we can see why that would have been so threatening to everything you'd constructed, because this was your survival strategy. So what would happen if you let go of your survival strategy?
I'm supposedly an African jungle bunny that survives everywhere, but I couldn't survive on the table, Nat.
Yeah.
I ran away.
Yeah, because I think because I suppose you hadn't worked through yet then all the shame-based identifications you had. So what would have rushed in is the terror. Who will I be if I'm not my persona? Who will I be? And, it was very touching to hear your story of, being at a young age and, having asthma and, being physically weaker than the other boys and smaller and, and the debilitating shame of that you internalize, and then the having to push and be something and be the best, because that was a massive feat to be the best in those circumstances. And some of those stories you shared with me of the lengths you went to and the incredible courage and stamina. And also you had to sacrifice a lot to be what you thought you had to be to survive. So no wonder, just like that, to let that go, it's going to bring up a lot of those unresolved emotions. And that's what I would suggest needs to be then, as that gets worked through more and more, it's going to be easier and easier. It won't feel so threatening to be.
I guess we got work to do, Nat.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love it that you ended with that story, because that was just such a beautiful example of how these shame-based identifications really get in the way of our own fulfillment and feeling connected to our own hearts and being connected in relationship. And really, really interfere with that flow of happiness.
Yeah, it's very puzzling, very puzzling.
So, yeah, I so appreciate you in this session, just being so open and vulnerable and willing to go there and model it for everyone on this call. I'm sure everyone has learned so much from, watching you really be it and live it and walk the talk. And I really experienced that with you when you came over and had 2 evenings with both me and my husband, and we were just very touched by you and how you're really living this. You don't just talk this, you're really living this.
Thank you.
Thoughts and all. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've
So much.
come towards the end. Is there anything you'd like to remind everyone, or reaffirm something, or just touch on something as we come to a close?
Yeah, perhaps that we all have a lot more capacity to love than we realize, and for happiness and fulfillment. And if we're not feeling that, I would just really encourage anyone who's listening to this to, find someone that you can do some work with, to really investigate and become curious as what's getting in the way of me feeling more whole, feeling happier. Because often when we're not, or having issues in our relationship, we're just disconnected from who we are on some level without even realizing, or we've got these identifications operating in the background that we're not even aware of. So that's what I would encourage everyone to do.
All right. Thank you very much, Nat. Thank you for this beautiful experience. Thank you for supporting me through the healing. And we will continue our journey one-on-one, separately, not live.
That was very courageous.
All right. So thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And I hope that the pieces on shame, on attachment, on the superego, and something new, narcissism. I was never called a narcissist. So thank you, Nat, for adding another wonderful label to my list. No, just kidding. All right. Thank you, everyone. And see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.